I'm thrilled that Columbus Citizens Foundation is able to have this conversation tonight with Cooley's Anemia Foundation. And I'm especially thrilled because we've actually tried to do this for over a year, and between scheduling conflicts and, reemergence of COVID variants, we had to keep rescheduling. So I'm really thrilled to be here with Craig Butler, who's the executive director, as well as Ralph Colasanti, who is president of the foundation, and then our two foundation members, Frank Somma and Peter Chieco. And it's great to be able to have this conversation. And I know that for everybody who's on the panel tonight, it's a very, very personal discussion, as well as one that has to do with thinking about new medical protocols and advances in how we treat disease. But I think what you'll hear tonight is also the incredible personal journeys that drove people to be so engaged with this particular topic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our good friends. And I'm not sure which of you is going to kick it off, but I'm going to turn it to Craig first to let us know who's going to speak first.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm just going to hand things over immediately to our real MC of the evening, Mr. Frank Somma.
Well, thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. I really appreciate those of you who have signed on to participate tonight. The Cooley's Anemia Foundation, taking care of patients and family with the genetic blood disease thalassemia, has been around since 1954. And I'm really blessed to be joined tonight by my great friend, Peter Chieco. Pete's been president of the foundation twice and done a fabulous job. And of course, our first patient president, Ralph Colasanti. And, Ralph and I have known each other for over 30 years. And I'm really looking forward. He's a newly minted president, and I'm very much looking forward to his leadership. I watched him as leader of our patient group way back when, and he just showed such tremendous signs of leadership. We're really blessed to have him in. So Cooley's Anemia, you'll hear more from Peter and from Ralph, but I joined the foundation, Columbus Citizens Foundation, originally because of Cooley's Anemia. My friend Frank Fusaro, who came out and helped us a lot with fundraisers, invited me to join the foundation, and he thought it would be a really good connection because back in the late 50s, we thought that the disease was strictly something that affected Italian people of Italian descent. And what we learned later was that was kind of the immigration pattern. We had Italians and Greeks, so the disease is often referred to as Mediterranean anemia. But I think that was more the immigration pattern into America. And today we have a much more diverse group of patients, many, many patients from Asia, as well as still, our Italians and Greeks, but, from all over Asia, we've got patients from everywhere. So it's really a worldwide disease. And, we have extended our reach to be more effective globally and try to help people get the care that they need. It's amazing that in America, we've gotten to a point where the care is pretty good. When Pete and I both have children with the disease, and by children, I mean women in their 30s. But, when they were diagnosed, we were told flat out our kids wouldn't make it through their teen years, that they would die while they were teenagers, and they wouldn't thrive, and they wouldn't be able to keep up, and their bones wouldn't form, and they wouldn't be able to physically keep up with their classmates, and they would look different, et cetera, et cetera. And the science, because of the Cooley's Anemia Foundation, the science advanced wonderfully, rapidly. I often joke with my friends that the return on investment, to my friends that have been generous to us at fundraisers, the ROI in Cooley's Anemia is better than any disease on the planet. Because, you can give your money to a host of different organizations, but in thalassemia, if you invested with us way back when Alicia was born in 1985, and we thought she wouldn't make it till to the year 2000, and now she's 37 years old and has a daughter of her own. So the return on investment by investing in the Cooley's Anemia Foundation has been tremendous. And we're really blessed that the care has gotten so much better and the science has advanced so well. And now we're at the point where We still have a lot of science to develop. Craig's going to update you on gene therapy and what's happening with that. But we still have so many patients, even in this country, that aren't near major centers for thalassemia, that aren't getting the care that, for example, Alicia's getting. And the disparity in care is awful. It's one of the things the foundation addresses, not just in the US, but worldwide. So I'd like to introduce now my good friend and former president of the foundation, Peter Chieco.
Well, thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. Frank and I go back because both of us have daughters with the disease, and Frank served as national president for 10 years. So him and I have had a dual role with the family member, but it's obviously grown a lot more than that as you get involved. And one of the things that I'll say very early on when I was involved was when I came to the first board meeting for the Cooley Anemia Foundation, because of the way Frank said about the immigration, I didn't realize that a lot of other people there, patients there and parents, were of Italian background. And I'm like, that's kind of crazy, but I love being around Italians. My daughter gets to have a disease with other Italians, which kind of just seems strange. But through that connection, because we had so much, not only Italian patients, but Italian leadership in the foundation, and the founding members back in 1954 were Italian descent, the Columbus Club has been involved with us for a very long time. Some of the greatest, best memories I had were taking my daughter Michelle, and we used to have a Cooley Anemia float. And, we would be part of the Columbus Club and do the float. And what a great experience for our patients, because here they are dealing with a disease, and we'll talk about the treatment on that in a moment. But they had a chance to feel like little celebrities on these floats. And, Joey Fay would always make sure we'd get a flat tire right in front of the St. Patrick's Cathedral, and the Cardinal would literally come out and bless the children. I have a picture of my daughter having Cardinal Cook's crown on her head. It was an incredible moment. And the Columbus Club gave us that moment, and a lot of fundraisers we had done over the years with Sunder and so many other people from the Columbus Club were so successful in helping us raise a lot of money. So there's always this deep connection of having grown up with a child with the disease and the Columbus Club. Now, the disease itself, each parent has to have a gene that could produce a child that can't make a normal red blood cell. And just to give you a little background, scientists believe that the malaria belt, which clearly covers the Mediterranean area, put so much pressure that individuals that had smaller red blood cells could survive the fevers that you would get from malaria. A lot of times those fevers would be fatal. And so if you had these smaller red blood cells, you could survive better from malaria. Unfortunately, each parent that had those smaller red blood cells, they had a genetic mutation. They were okay, but they could have a child, and with each pregnancy, there's a 25% chance the child would have both of these genes, but for her or him, it would be abnormal, and they would not be able to make a normal red blood cell. So, think about that your body has what they call fetal hemoglobin from your mom, and during the pregnancy and after the baby's born, this fetal hemoglobin actually switches to adult hemoglobin. And you hear, type A, type B, type O. Well, when that switch occurs for our children and children with this disease, it's defective. And so they'll get very anemic. So, the story is typical, but for my daughter, around 8 months of age, she was very pale, very lethargic, really was irritable. And, we brought her to the doctor, and her hemoglobin was well less than half normal. And so, we get to the hospital, they do the test, and they come and say, well, she has this genetic disease, and we're sorry, it's a fatal disease. I'm like, wow. So we meet a hematologist, and they always tell us, well, we have a treatment because the blood level is so low, the anemia is so bad that if she isn't given red blood cells from someone else in a transfusion, she won't live very long. So she gets her first blood transfusion from when she's a year old, and now she's 35, 34, and for 33 years, every 2 weeks, she gets a unit or two of red blood cells from someone else that has donated her type, typically B positive she gets. But the story is that red blood cells, a basic component is iron. And if you get extra blood cells because you can't make it yourself, you're accumulating iron, and iron is toxic. So if you just get your blood transfusions, which many of our children in the beginning did, they would actually die within 10 years because of the toxic buildup of the iron. And it wasn't until the late 70s they started to develop a drug called desproportionately that could help get rid of the iron in the body. And the issue was, and for my daughter and Frank's daughter, and back in that day in the 80s, we had to put a pump on every night attached to a tube that would be attached to their body. And while they slept, typically over 10, 12 hours, this syringe would be slowly going in, delivering the medicine, and it would remove the iron, or a good chunk of the iron. And so it was a very difficult thing to do for your child, and was painful for them in the beginning, to even get used to it. But you did what you had to. So if you did the blood transfusions and you did the nightly therapy, you could keep your children alive longer, and in the hope for a more normal life. But as Frank mentioned, none of us thought that our daughters could have children. And I've been blessed as well that my daughter Michelle has 2 children. So we're writing history here, and we have more and more patients living a longer life. And because of the activities of Frank Somma and Craig Butler and Ralph, who is our new patient president, we've been able to influence the outcome for better types of what we call chelators. That pump, if you will, is still available and it's still the gold standard, but we have a pill now you can take in a drink that does the same thing to get rid of the iron. So as we stand at the moment, and Craig will talk about it further, is where we really have every 2 weeks, for the most part, you get a blood transfusion every night, or most nights you're taking either this pump or you're taking some type of pill, and it's a balancing act. And so when it all works well, it's great, but you have to worry about the blood supply. So our patients got devastated, by hepatitis C, AIDS, and thank goodness the blood supply is better, but we're always watching that. So I know I gave a lot of technical information, but I think for members of the Columbus Club, I think you should be at least aware of that. If you're of Italian descent, there's a chance you could carry the gene. The gene for you is normal. It won't do anything to you, but you could have a child, or you could pass on the gene to one of your offspring, and they potentially could meet someone that has the gene and have a chance to have the disease. And so, we estimate there's over 1 million people in this country that carry the gene. And outside of the US, actually, it's a much more common disorder, especially as Frank mentioned, not only in the Mediterranean area, but now in Asia as well. So maybe on that note, I've talked a lot about the disease, but I know we want to share a video with you that can really, I think, be a good way to get a feel for a family that has a disease and how they handle it. So I think that's what we're going to go to next.
We never thought it was going to happen to us. We were both new parents, and it was fairly devastating news at the time. Yeah, we didn't really know how to be parents to a child, let alone a child with such a potentially debilitating illness.
Scarlet, a ball of sunshine and just a positive little ray of light. Having a child that has an illness is definitely not easy because you're always thinking of the what ifs.
The toughest thing on any human being, toughest thing in a human life, is that your child is sick. Thalassemia is a disease of the blood. It's a genetic disease of the blood. It's when the child is born, they're not able to make hemoglobin properly. And if they can't make hemoglobin, they can't make red cells. If they can't make red cells, they need to go on transfusions for the rest of their lives. So the other thing that happens is that red cells contain iron, and the iron level in the body goes up. And iron is not very good for your organs, and so we need to get rid of the iron with something called chelation.
AJ lives a pretty charmed life. He's done a lot of things in his 6 or 7 short years than I had ever done into my 30s. As a father, I would do anything I could to take this illness away. But where we were 6 years ago to now are 2 totally different places. there'll be some type of cure. Stem cell therapy, gene therapy, the medications that are out now. When I'm on the porch in my rocking chair, I think that AJ's life would be dramatically different than his. It definitely has made me and Lisa realize how precious time is, and to try to make the most of the time that we have with our family and with those we care about.
When we first found out about Cooley's anemia, we would sit there and have tears, and we would look on the internet just to find information that she wasn't going to live a long life, and information that she wasn't going to live a happy life or a child's life. I would say is probably the hardest part about it. It was really, really a hard time, because it's not something that you want ever for your child. It's not something that you want for any child. But she is a strong cookie. She's just positive about everything, no matter what. And she's made us stronger. She's the strongest little girl that I've known. We know that there's going to be something out there soon, and we're just waiting for it.
I always tell people when they're donating money, well, what if your dollar's the dollar that provides the cure? I mean, you never know. We're closer than we have ever been.
Curing a patient with a disease that is costing a kid's life is life-changing. Not life-changing for the patient, but life-changing for the people who do this.
There's a lot of hope, and we can build on that hope every day.
Wow. So watching that video just makes me think about where I came from and who I am today. I'm Ralph Colasanti. I am the first patient president of this foundation. And when I look back at my life compared to like AJ and Scarlett's, and trust me, they're still going through a lot. Even as far back when Frank was talking about Alicia and Michelle, they kind of grew up in front of my eyes, all these great, strong women, and they inspired me to keep going. Because when I was diagnosed back in, I want to say, I think I was finally diagnosed in the early 60s. So I wasn't diagnosed with thalassemia until I was about 6 years old. So I've already had experienced a large spleen, you know, a lot of misfortune in the beginning. I was just very lethargic and very yellow. My mom was taking me to different pediatricians. My pediatrician sent me all over, and they tried different things. They knew I had an anemia, but they didn't know what I had. He thought I was allergic to milk, so they took milk away from me for, I don't know. I just remember, you know, not having to eat cheese and not drinking milk. It was a burden. It was horrible, you know, especially when you're a little kid. But we were sent to Rutgers, and that was the pediatrician that finally diagnosed me with what he had called Mediterranean anemia. And it's funny because I was looking through my mom's old files when she moved, and I found the letter that they had sent. And the person, I don't know if it's the same person, but the person who diagnosed me, if it's the same person, he has a building named for him now at Rutgers. So I was pretty impressed by that because I did a little research. But so I didn't get really any care until I was at least 6, 7 years old. And you know, my uncle had lived in California, and he knew about Children's Hospital of Oakland, and that they had dealt with this situation. So we were actually figuring we were going to move to San Francisco and be with my uncle and, you know, get care. In the meantime, my aunt, who didn't want her sister to move far away from her, found the New York hospital. So, so I ended up going to New York Presbyterian, Cornell. Back then it was just called New York Hospital. And I spent 40 years in the pediatric ward of that hospital. The first, from the time I was like 6 years old to the time I was probably like 42, because, you know, we were in peds. You're growing up in the pediatric ward. So, you know, the diagnosis was the same diagnosis most people get today, where you're not going to live long. Basically, I told my parents, you know, my mom, that if I made it to 20, that'd be a miracle. You were looking at anywhere from your early teens to early 20s before you expire. And going through this process, I wasn't transfused regularly. The thing they found out is that I was what they call intermediate, which meant I was able to hold my blood count at around an 8 or 9 and function. And then when I would get low, like I would actually go into the 6s before they would transfuse me. So it was a matter of going to the hospital every so many months, like I believe it was every other month, to get your blood counts and talk to the doctor. And there was no desperol, there was no chelation. And that was the reason why they didn't transfuse us early, is because they figured we'd buy a little bit of time by not getting transfused. Unfortunately, not getting transfused caused a lot of other problems down the line, which we didn't know about until later on in life. And of course, we all know about it today. But so it did a lot more damage than probably what the chelation would have done. But my mom always felt that, you know, it was weird. It was a weird childhood, because you want to be a normal kid, but you had this hospital thing that happened every so often, and your friends kind of knew about it because you missed school. And then you ran into problems with infections and stuff like that that kept you, you know, in the hospital for weeks at a time. When I got my spleen out, of course, got infected after that. So that was like a, you know, 4 or 5 week ordeal. But, and you know, nobody around my neighborhood in New Jersey knew anything about, you know, Cooley's anemia. So I was always going to New York. So it was always a ride through the tunnel and into New York whenever I got a fever, whenever I got, you know, any type of illness. So it was a struggle for my mom. My mom was at that time divorced, so it was just her and I and my grandmother. But you know, her feeling was, and this was, you know, what she told me when we got the, you know, the diagnosis, was that God has you and God will take care of you. But what she wanted to do was make sure she could make things better for other people. So if there was any type of clinical trial, I was voluntold to do it. And I say voluntold because there are a lot of them. I didn't want, you got stuck a lot. There were liver biopsies, there were all these things. But when they were testing desperol, it was a 28-day trial that I spent in the hospital, 28 days away from my friends, away from my family, not eating regular food, just whatever they gave you, because they had to measure the iron going in and of course the iron going out. And it was an ordeal. And, you know, I was a kid, of course, so I made the best of it. Wheelchair races up and down the hall, and you know, got friendly with the nurses, and, you know, it was my life. I was 28 days in there, and, you know, you didn't have Netflix or anything where you could binge or anything like that. You had, you know, a few channels where you had a little clicker on the hospital thing. But, you know, what came out of that was the fact that desperol got approved for subcutaneous use in thalassemia patients. Now, around this time, I was in my early teens, well, late teens. I don't want to say early teens. I was mid-teens. I was in high school. So once the approval came and, you know, it came my turn, they're like, you're going to have to start doing this pump. And I'm like, I'm 17 years old, 16, 17 years old. I'm driving. I don't want to spend 8 hours a day sleeping with this pump. You know, I'm barely getting home at 12 o'clock at night and making it to school the next day and trying to live life. And, you know, by that time of the journey, in and out of hospitals and going to clinic and seeing friends that were not there anymore, you know, my life was you know, I want to say I invented the hashtag YOLO thing, because my thing was you only live once, and I was going to live as much as I can in these few years that God was giving me. You know, I was going to do as much as I can, whether it was, you know, jumping ramps with my bicycle or riding downstairs with my bicycle. Yeah, it was a trip to the hospital after it. But, you know, that was me. I wanted to live. I wanted to be like every other kid. And I was going to do everything that I could do. I couldn't play football. So, you know, when high school came around, of course, I couldn't play football. So I was the water boy, and I was proud of being the water boy. I didn't care who made fun of me, because people were making fun of me all the time because of the way I looked. 100% Italian, and I look more Chinese than anything. But, you know, so it Thalassemia kind of gave me the tough skin and made me the person that I am today. So it's not something I regret or look back on or as a burden. It's just my life. It's just part of my life. Now, you know, I look at like Alicia, and it was funny because I never forget this day when Alicia was at clinic. And this is, you know, she was born in 85. I graduated high school in 80. So obviously there's a big age difference. But she was always cheerful and bubbly. And you know, clinic for us older patients was a place where we would hang out and talk and get to see each other every 2 weeks, for some, for me, every 3 weeks, or, you know, for others, every 4 weeks. But, you know, it was like our bonding area, because you never had that that conference that we have like we do now, where you could get together once a year and talk to someone who's going through the same struggles as you. And it was also kind of a morbid place, because like when you got to clinic, you would always find out who passed and who's, you know, whose friends weren't there anymore. And, you know, but I would never forget Alicia when I was much older at this time. And, you know, I was actually struggling because the pump was not something I did. It was always something I did enough of, but I was not religious with it. I did not chelate very well. I figured I was past my time, and you know, I just did what I had to do. I would go on binges, like I would do the pump for maybe, you know, 6 weeks in a row, and then stop for, you know, 6 months. Only because it wasn't the fact that I had to give myself a needle. It wasn't the fact that I had to stick it for 8 hours. It was the fact that it hurt like hell. And to me, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't a quality of life. I had bumps all over my stomach all the time. I tried it in my legs, and I couldn't walk half the time. So it was, you know, that kind of struggle. And I was like, it's either this or death. And at that point in life, I was really thinking, you know, I've been on a few cruises. I had some really good friends, and life was really good. And, you know, death wasn't looking so bad. So I was never afraid of death. That was something I grew up with. That was something I was never afraid of, and probably still am not afraid today. But when I got past that hump and I met this girl, Alicia, like it wasn't the first time I met her. I've seen her there on and off, but it was the first time I actually talked to her. And she was there with her sister, and I heard her say, yeah, it's just a real inconvenience. And I was like, it is. It's just an inconvenience. I've been living this thing as a disease, and this little girl here is telling me it's just an inconvenience. And at that point in time, I just met, you know, I had girlfriends here and there, but I just met the love of my life, who's now my wife of 30 years. And actually, you know, it was like, yeah, it's just an inconvenience. But my whole goal was, when am I going to get a pill? When am I going to get a pill? Because they promised me a pill. The day they gave me the pump, they said, we'll have a pill in a few years. Well, in 2005, I got a drink, which made me very happy. In the meantime, I had gotten married, and I had my first child, which they told me I wouldn't have. So the story is kind of getting a little bit better now, right? You know, and I had a person to take care of, and I had a family to take care of. So I was like, I would always think of Alicia and say, it's just an inconvenience. You know, doctor's appointments, just an inconvenience. You know, living my life around thalassemia, and that's basically what I had to do. And that's what I did. And it was just that little inconvenience. So, you know, here I am, chelating, getting better, got involved with the foundation. And that was probably the best thing I've done, is because I walked into the first meeting, and Frank realized that Frank and Peter, they both looked at me and, we were always treated as kids. Like we were the kids of the foundation. We were always talking about our kids. And, for a while they're looking at me like a kid. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, you're almost as old as we are. You're up here, and when that happened, that just clicked for me that, I needed to get involved more and I needed to do more. And I kind of just got involved because of a promise that I made to a friend. And, from there, it just kind of escalated. And I just I see how far we've come. And, I started getting involved, I want to say in 1998, somewhere around then. And since 1998, I've gotten not one, but 2 oral chelators. And I managed to survive till that happened. Like I managed to do enough. I would always play that death roll game. When my numbers went up, I'd do death roll. When my numbers went back up, when they went down, I'd stop. When my numbers went up, I'd do it. But then I got XJ'd, which was this chalky drink that everybody complained about. And I was just so happy to drink. And I haven't missed a dose since I got XJ'd, which turned into Jade New. And that's what I'm still on today, Jade New. Now it's just a matter of popping a couple of pills in the morning. But all of that, I looked at all the hard work that this foundation did. And like Frank said, the return on investment that we have gotten over the years is just incredible. I mean, I didn't think I'd see it. I didn't think I'd, be married with 2 children and a grandchild. I have a granddaughter that my daughter just 8 months old. And when Blair came into my life, it's like, oh my God, I kind of made it. I kind of lived, full circle. And, I want everybody else to have that same treatment. Like Frank said, not everything works for one person. XJ doesn't work for everybody. J-New doesn't work for everybody. Desrol seems to work for most people. Paraprox is out there and that does a great job. But again, it doesn't work for every thalassemia patient because we're all different. We're all unique. And our treatment that we get in the area that we live in is fantastic. We have options. When I moved to Delaware from New Jersey, I was able to go to Philadelphia and there's a center of excellence there. I was started at CHOP and then they started realizing, hey, we have 40-year-olds in pediatrics and now they do a transition into the HUF, which is with Penn Medicine, University of Pennsylvania Hospital. So, that's where I'm treated now. And it's actually become even better because I could get my transfusions locally because I found a hematologist that will work with my specialist that's over at Penn. So, so I'm not traveling into Philly every 3 weeks. I'm traveling, maybe 20 minutes to Christiana Hospital, which is a godsend. But I look at like AJ and Scarlett, and I know their lives are going to be 100% better than what my generation went through. And I can only say thank you to this foundation. And now the fact that I'm leading this foundation, my whole thing is not screw it up. I look at Peter and I look at Frank as my mentors and Tony Viola, all the people who came before me. And I'm like, they raised so much money. They have all these connections and I don't have that. But the only thing I do have is I had the connection to the patients. I know what we need. I know what we're looking for. And they're all my friends. So they all will call me and tell me what they want or what they need. So all I could say is if you're watching this, find it in your heart to donate to this foundation and make this foundation something that, you keep in your heart, because honestly, our office is small. We have probably the smallest budget that a foundation could have. And yet we've done things like cured thalassemia. And I say cured thalassemia because there are 2 forms of cure. There's a bone marrow transplant that's been a curable option for a little while. And gene therapy has just gotten approved because of this foundation, because of the work that, and the patients that did the clinical trials and went through the trials to bring gene therapy to light. That's an option. And that's a better option than bone marrow transplant for most, because number one, you're using your own cells, so you're not worried about finding a match. And number two, it is available to a lot more patients. So hopefully we'll see some patients jump on that bandwagon and be cured. So I want to say with a less than $2 million budget over the years, we've conquered so many things. And what people don't realize is anytime anybody needs blood, you could thank the Cooley Foundation, because blood safety has been our mantra. We always look for blood safety. And it's this foundation that's gotten Congress to change all these laws and the blood banks to change all these laws and to screen for hepatitis and HIV and to do all this. We live because of blood donors, and I thank all the donors out there. And that's like, if you don't know if you can't donate to the foundation, then roll up your sleeve and just donate blood, because we need that just as much. But that's just a little bit of my life. But I just look at Alicia, who has a baby girl, beautiful baby girl, River, and I look at Michelle, who has 2. I mean, these are things that we didn't think about when they were born. Pete and Frank, like you heard, they were just struggling to figure out how to get a pump into their kid to keep them alive for a few more years. Now, they're grandparents. So, my journey is just my journey, and every patient has their own story. And all our stories are different because the disease is different. But, it was cool to be the Italian kid with the disease, I guess. But, now, like you said, it's all over the world. We find it in different countries, and we're here to help everybody. So, and our biggest goal is, like I think it was mentioned earlier, is to get people in this country to centers of excellence so that they can be treated correctly. Because trust me, you just can't walk into an ER, and I've done it many times, and say, I have thalassemia, and they're testing you for all kind of stuff and asking you all kind of questions. But most of the time I'm just arguing with people to please call my doctor and find out what you need to do, because I'll tell you what you need to do, but you're not going to listen. But
Frank, I'm going to stop you. Ralph, I'm going to stop you there for a second. I want all of you to have a chance to respond. But, Ralph, when I was listening to you, I had sort of 2 concurrent streams that were, I think, battling with each other and not quite certain. One is, you had a very, very painful journey, and you can talk about it so eloquently and calmly. And I think there's probably nothing more frustrating than hearing that you had to go through such a long process till finally somebody understood what your disease was. And you undoubtedly suffered more than you needed to because of that. And that's probably the worst thing your parents especially must have endured, as that you were all on this journey together. And yet at the same time, now that you're president, and there's no fear that you're going to screw this up, I can't imagine anybody better positioned to steer the next chapter of Cooley's anemia than somebody who's been through what you've been through and witnessed the incredible changes in the field. And I didn't know the budget was $2 million a year. That is a remarkable testament to Craig and Frank and Peter and Frank Fusaro and others who were at the helm for a long time, because that is a very small amount of money to be as effective as you all have been. And I think the other thing that I was thinking while I was listening, to everybody talk, but I think especially Ralph, is that maybe still the most dramatic thing needed is the best communication platform ever, because people really need to understand what the disease is, what the warning signs are that you may have a child with this disease. And the Centers for Excellence, goes for thalassemia and goes for all diseases. I mean, we're very fortunate in the New York metro area to have a wealth of good medical facilities, and most metro centers across the United States are that way. But, if you live in a rural area or, live in a place not served by good research medical centers, you could languish the way Ralph did. So I'm going to turn it back over, to Frank, Peter, Ralph and Craig, because I'm sure you have some other thoughts to share with us. And then if people have questions, we would be happy for people to write into the chat, or we're a small enough group that people can unmute themselves. But I feel like this has been a long time coming down this program, and we've only scratched the surface of what's important to say.
Well, thanks, Lisa. I think what we'd like to do is have Ralph mention gene therapy, and it's just beginning, and I think Craig can speak to that eloquently. So please do.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'll be happy to. And I'll try to keep this a little short, because gene therapy itself can be very confusing and complicated. But I just want to mention that on August 17th of this year, the FDA did approve the first gene therapy procedure for thalassemia, which is a major milestone for the thalassemia community, one which our foundation has been pursuing for more than 2 decades. But this is still just a first step, a very significant one, but it is not the end of the journey in terms of a cure for thalassemia. And I'll come back and talk about that in just a second. But first, I'll just kind of explain what the gene therapy process means in terms of thalassemia. So first off, gene therapy is an umbrella term for a number of different processes. What we're talking about with thalassemia is called a gene addition. And what this means is that with thalassemia, the problem is that the genes that are in charge of making the hemoglobin aren't working correctly. And so with gene therapy, a scientist is going in with gene addition, is going to make an addition to the patient's gene, give him a working hemoglobin gene, put it back in, and see if that can solve the problem. So this is that's the very basic part of it, but it involves a complicated process. They have to find a way of getting it into the patient in the first place, and to do that, they use what's called a vector, and that's a virus, because viruses are really good at getting into places in the body where we typically don't want them to, but in this case, we want them to get into our cells. Viruses are good at that. So they take the virus, they kill the bad part of the virus, and so what they're left with is a really good mechanism for getting things in there. And then they take a working hemoglobin gene, they put it right there in the vector, and they say, now we need to put this into the patient. But to do that, they first have to take blood stem cells out of the patient, because they want to take what's not working for the patient. They take the blood stem cells out, they take the working stem cell and the vector, and they put it into the patient's stem cells, and then they want to put it back into the patient. But because now they're putting something into the patient that wasn't there before, they have to make some arrangements, because if you just put something in that's not supposed to be there, a patient's body is going to say, wait, there's something going wrong here. My immune system says this is bad, and it's going to start attacking what the new foreign object that's there. So the patient has to have their immune system knocked out, basically. They have chemotherapy, a process called myeloablation, and the chemotherapy knocks out the immune system so that it doesn't attack the new cells when they're put back in. And it cleans out the bone marrow, because the bone marrow is where the blood cells are made. And you want to have a lot of room in there for these new blood stem cells to come in, get into the bone marrow, and start making new copies. And in a successful case, the blood cells will be reintroduced with a working gene in them. They'll get into the bone marrow, and they'll start multiplying so that they'll make enough working red blood cells to actually cure a person of their anemia if they have thalassemia. And there are clearly, if you're going to knock out someone's immune system, that means you're going to need some time to grow back. So this is what takes a little bit of time for the whole process. Now, the clinical trials that were done on this were very successful. There were about 90% of the patients that were treated did achieve transfusion independence. And even those that did not get totally free of their transfusions still had a reduction in the number of transfusions that they had to have. So it sounds like a great thing. Why are we saying that this is just a first step instead of, the end goal of a cure? Well, Because there are some problems or some potential drawbacks to the whole process. For one thing, knocking out the immune system means that a person needs to be hospitalized in a sterile environment for several weeks until their immune system can grow back, basically. Otherwise, they could get an infection, which could be very dangerous and in some cases could be fatal. And the myeloablative treatment essentially also causes infertility. So that's something that a patient needs to consider before they go through this. Is this a trade-off that I want to make at this point in my life? And of course, there's always the possibility that a person may go through this whole procedure, get to the end of it, and then for whatever reason, it didn't take, and they may be back where they started before, having gone through the whole procedure of gene therapy and having it not perhaps work for them. In addition, some patients may have health issues that might be related to thalassemia or might be related to something else, which could make undergoing the process risky or inadvisable. And then finally, there's just the cost of the process, which is going to be somewhere around $2.8 million. So that's not a very manageable level for most people. And at this point, because it was just approved by the FDA, we don't yet know, and because everyone's insurance plan is different, we don't really have a handle on, well, how much of that $2.8 million is going to be something that the patient is going to be responsible for, as opposed to an insurance plan being responsible for. So that's why I said earlier that this is a first step, but not necessarily the end of our journey for a cure. We're really, really excited about this option. We've worked and pushed for it for many, many years and are thrilled that we're finally seeing all of this hard work pay off. And we know that there will be new developments over the coming years that will address some of the drawbacks we've noted and will make gene therapy as a cure for thalassemia available for more and more of our patients. It will take time, but this is a major advance, and we are really, really thankful to all of our friends at Columbus Citizens Foundation for the longtime support that you have given us, which has helped our community reach this goal. And then just before I turn things back over to Frank, Lisa had mentioned something about the importance of testing. Frank, are you going to be addressing testing for traits, or would you like for me to go into that at this point?
Roll with it.
Okay.
You're doing great.
So here's the big takeaway that we want for people, particularly of Italian descent, to be knowing about. You may think to yourself, well, we've been told that if two parents and each of them have a thalassemia trait, if they have a child, there's a 25% chance with each pregnancy that the child may have a severe form of thalassemia. How do they know if they have the trait? In most cases, it's easy. The first step in particular is easy. Almost everyone in their complete blood count, which you probably have on file at your doctor's office, almost everyone already has a reading called an MCV. That stands for mean corpuscular volume. If you don't have it, you can ask for it on your next blood test. And it's a number which basically gives an idea of the size of your red blood cell. And if your MCV is 80 or less, you might have a thalassemia trait, especially if you're not iron deficient. So if you have an MCV of 80 or less, there's a couple of other simple blood tests that can be done, which can determine whether you have the trait. So that's one of our big takeaways if you are of anyone really, but particularly if you're of Italian descent, it's a good idea just to find out, do you carry the trait or not? And Frank, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, and what's interesting about trait testing too is that we had unfortunately lost a beautiful young girl that was 3 years old, and her dad's name is an Irish surname, and her folks were from India. So, we say if you're of Italian descent, but, with all of the way we are in America and different people marrying different people, who knows what gene was passed from where. So I think it's a great idea for people to know their MCV and feel like, well, I want to get further testing and be armed with this knowledge. Anyway, we want to go to a video now that has my beautiful daughter and granddaughter in it. So I'm looking forward to
that. Everything will change. These bodies expire, we grow old. My face, though it may look young today, will not be forever. This life is a gift. it's a gift. And so the gift I could give to her is to see that and appreciate it. The earliest memories of thalassemia for me are the bonds that I created with people who, some of them are no longer here. You go, you get your needles, you see your doctor, you see your nurses, they become your friends. And then there are these other children there. You don't know that your life is being threatened every day. You don't know that sitting in that chair and getting that treatment is saving your life, but you do know that the kid that's sitting next to you gets it. And I created some very close friendships with the people that were going through the same thing I was, and it made me feel not alone. These bracelets are a reminder that I will be going to the hospital, be going back to the hospital, and that thalassemia is very real. I never thought that I was going to have a child. I am blessed with healthy, it just makes me cry. I'm blessed with a healthy little girl who has my faulty genes. The fact that River has her help is everything. I can't imagine having to force her to stay still. If I had to stick her with a needle, like my parents had to do for me, to save my life. There's a different way that we all look at River because she came from this thalassemia body that I inhabit. I grew her for 9 months. I grew this baby inside of this body that I was told has something terribly wrong with it.
And back to you, Frank.
Oh, sure. Just get me all emotional and then make me talk. So a couple of real quick things that we can know. So Craig talked about the testing. That's an important thing. To understand that this is a worldwide disease is an important thing. To understand that gene therapy is a spectacular advancement and yet unavailable to 99 and 9/10% of patients, unless there's another clinical trial, because very few people are writing a check for 2.8 million on something that may or may not work. So it's a wonderful first step. I don't mean to count that out at all. It's super exciting. We've fought for it forever. I mean, this foundation, as Lisa was saying, with such a small budget, we have testified in front of the House Appropriations Committee in Congress many times. We have met with the head of the CDC many times. We are in Heart, Lung, and Blood and NIDDK and the National Institutes of Health in many of the divisions and have helped to bring the voice of people with an issue to our government to make real change. And as Ralph said, if you have anybody in your life that goes for a blood transfusion, you can thank the folks that came long before Pete and me and Craig and Ralph into this foundation, who made government relations, the CDC and National Institutes of Health, a major part of their lives, and hired lobbyists with the very little bit of money that we had and pushed policy to make sure that blood was safe. You think about, what Ralph went through. My daughter in the 80s, I remember having an HIV test when AIDS was rampant, and my daughter had to get red blood, and having these tests for her every few months and hiding it from my mother while I waited for the results. And it was, it was just amazingly trying on top of everything else that we're worried about. But what was so cool is that the Cooley Anemia Foundation was way out in front of that. Just like, you recently saw these diseases, tick-borne diseases like Ehrlichia and some of these other, we were out there with that. When bird flu came, we're in front of the CDC with that. Is it transmissible? So, the foundation's really on it. And my brothers and sisters from the Columbus Citizens Foundation, we can't thank you enough for the support the foundation has given us, and so many of the members that have shown up for our events and participated and been honorees and raised funds and, did blood drives. And, it's just been a fantastic association for us. And I think what all of us can do is, just kind of spread the word a little bit. We're that very little known disease, and we are a part of the Columbus Citizens Foundation, thanks to the wonderful people who have been there before me, and the folks that have been on the board, et cetera, for Columbus Citizens Foundation. So we've got a real association, and I just like us to, if you talk to somebody, you just mention that this is happening and that we're all in it together, and that we've done our darndest to take care of kids that were all of Italian descent when we met. That's how we met, and yet now, we're influencing the world. So I think we should look to see if there's some questions either in the chat or unmute folks, or however Lisa and Antonella want to do that.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I am going to say that Antonella can go ahead and unmute everybody. And if people do have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and let us know, or don't be shy, write into the chat. And I think while we're waiting for questions, if there are any, I would just say that one interesting thing about the world in which we live is that even if a particular disease only affects a small number of people proportionately, I mean, many of these things have effects across the boards. You're mentioning that you've testified, in Congress, to the CDC. I imagine you've lobbied a lot of elected officials at all levels. But I think the interesting thing is, because of many things that have happened across the globe in the last 25 years, I mean, blood screening is essential now, not just for thalassemia, but for everything. I vividly remember being in college, donating blood every time there was a blood drive. And now today, there's screening protocols about donated blood. And if you have certain diseases, you can't donate blood. And I think, as we saw during the pandemic, we all can become very vulnerable very quickly. And we don't always know the underlying health issues we have. So a small disease can still have a very big impact. And there is now a question: where would we find medical equipment to accommodate needs? Craig, do you want to take that?
Yeah. You're talking about where would you find if you had thalassemia, where would you find medical equipment to accommodate that? You would really want to be going to one of the major centers of thalassemia treatment centers, working with a thalassemia hematologist to determine what equipment you might need. But depending on whether you're talking about for personal or for testing, it really is best to go to a major thalassemia treatment center, of which there are about 10 of them around the country, to get the testing that you need in order to determine exactly what kind of treatment you need to have.
May I say something?
Go ahead.
My name is Joseph Sands. I'm a patient.
Joe.
How are you, Greg? I want to thank you guys, Greg, Peter, Frank, Ralph. You guys have been a great help to us, and I appreciate it. I am 70 years old with thalassemia. I'm going through quite a bit. So has Ralph and many of our patients. And certainly helps. You're right. The Center of Excellence is great, but there's still a lot of hospitals, even in New Jersey and Maryland, that really do not care for their patient that they're supposed to. But I think we get our voice out there and teach those doctors and those hospitals is what we need to do.
Thank you.
I think that's been one of the goals of the foundation, was to educate doctors in small rural communities. Our medical advisory board and the foundation holds these webinars and kind of try to teach people, how to handle thalassemia in some rural communities. And it's another thing that the foundation had put together.
I'll just echo something I said earlier, that we've been blessed, I think, in a way that that this foundation was founded by hardworking ethnic Italian Americans. They they were dealt with, in some cases, very early on, there wasn't a lot of hope. But they never gave up, and they worked really hard from a very grassroots level, and sometimes with not a lot of education, but an incredible amount of drive. And we've all benefited from those early years. But the relationship with the Columbus Club and other ethnic organizations have been really crucial to helping us have that bigger voice and be able to meet individuals that have been able to help us take to the next level. The Columbus Club brings so many great leaders from so many industries, and to have the relationship we've had with you over the years and be able to be part of that, it still continues to pay such huge dividends. So I think all the members, whether they had known about Cooley's Anemia or not, should take a lot of pride that their foundation has been very involved. We've gotten a lot of support from Angelo Vivolo, Frank Pissarro, and many great leaders in the past that have always been there to help us. And we're always here to continue to tell the story. But underneath the surface, there's a very good story that you can all be very proud of.
Well, Peter, that's great to hear. And I think on behalf of Columbus Citizens Foundation, what I will say is I've been an employee there exactly 3 years and 3 weeks. So I am the newest person on the block. But I will say that if I had to sum up what I think about Columbus Citizens Foundation in one sentence, I would say that, it is filled with a group of passionate, dedicated, generous people. And they really band together when it's important. And so it's great to hear that so many people in the foundation have been so involved and supportive. I'm mindful that people probably want to get to dinner. So I am going to thank all of you, but I think a special thanks to Ralph and to Frank and Alicia in absentia, because it's not easy to talk about, a disease so candidly and openly. And, for Alicia to make a video with her daughter is not an easy thing. And I think that, the best way for people to understand the impact of a disease like this is to hear from people like Frank and Alicia, who are overwhelmingly positive against the odds. And so, I really hope this is only the first of many conversations we'll have in the years to come. And I hope that one day we'll have a conversation that, as Ralph hoped, will just be a pill that solves it all. And thalassemia will be relegated to one of those diseases that people say, oh my God, once upon a time, that was a problem. And so I can't thank you all enough. And thank our audience for being with us. And just in case, I'm going to do a shameless plug for Columbus Day. And if you are in the New York metro area, come out and join us on Fifth Avenue for the parade. There's nothing better than being all together and celebrating our heritage and our friendship. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, ciao.